Hi, this is Susan Carlson. Welcome to my studio. I would like to talk a little bit about this quilt. It's entitled Peace, Love, Tie-Dye, Save the Whales. It's a portrait of my son Sam when he was 13 years old. One thing I am especially happy with in this piece is the use of some novelty fabrics. And I'd like to show you a couple of the prints that I've used in each one of the panels. Peace, Love, Tie-Dye, Save the Whales. So starting with peace. Here you have peace signs, of course. And I've worked them into his face and his hair. So we've got there on his neck. There's some other peace signs here. You can see where I've cut them out from the fabric using some of the green so that it blends a little bit. Now another thing about Sam at that age, and even now, he loves cucumbers. So here's some cucumber novelty fabric. You wouldn't necessarily think about putting them in a face, but they're green. And I've used them in the nose, the cheek, and there right underneath his lips. Now moving on to Love, I found some great novelty fabric here that has some skulls and crossbones on them. Now, what was important about the skull and crossbone is that he loved skull and crossbone shirts, so I had to cut that out and it became part of this little t-shirt bit down there. Also, I used right here, you can see some of the heart and flowers became a mom tattoo. I mean, you got to have that, right? Especially for a 13-year-old. And then up here, oh yeah, some of the heart. See the heart right there? Got worked into his cheek. So those were fun using something like that that you normally wouldn't use for a portrait, right? And then of course you've got good old Love, Peace, that looks very 60s, 70s, and that went right up here for Love on his forehead. Now moving on down to tie-dye, I did use tie-dye fabrics from a friend in a class, but then I also found this. I know some of you liked it when I used clothing. So here you go. This was a shirt, but you can see it's definitely tie-dyed, and it really came in handy for some of this, the design that's right here. And I was able to cut out some of these lines, these kind of flowy lines in the fabric, and use them over here in the hair especially. It really came in handy. And then another thing I used for this one was some of the fabric from this shirt of Sam's. This was his, and he painted this, he tie-dyed this in a little class one time, but you can see I used some of the fabric right here as highlights on his nose, his cheek, and his chin. So it has some of his own clothing in it as well. And then the last one is Save the Whales, which was a little thing we came up with. We went down to New Zealand one time as a family trip, and we ended up going on a whale watch and saw a sperm whale, which was pretty cool. So I definitely had to work in some of these little whales into his cheek. And see, there's a sperm whale. And up here in his forehead as well. And then this fabric I got in New Zealand. It's actually a design based on the Paua shell, the abalone shells found in their waters. And that was here in his cheek. Another version I put up in his eyeglasses. So, you know, being a portrait of Sam, and it also has things about him worked into it. So they're just a few of the fabrics that I used in here. It was a really fun thing to do, and it's nice to work in as part of the story. Some of the fabrics that you choose can be part of the story about the quilt. And that's what's always kind of fun to do. Thanks. In this special extended version of this video, exclusively for my Patreon subscribers, I'd like to talk a little bit more about fabric selection. And here I'd like to talk about the hair, because that's something that comes up, that people ask me about and comes up in classes. So in the hair in each one of these, he's got long hair, right? So I needed something flowy. So when I was looking for fabric, I'm looking for that flow in my fabric design. Now here for Peace, you can see what some of those are and this one here that I've used right here. And you can see how I cut out some of the curves in the design and used them to help move the curves in his hair. There are also kind of little curly-Q vine sort of batiks here, some leaves. This one was a print that had some big floral patterns and designs in it. And I cut them out with that curve, and then it helped move and make his hair nice and flowy like it was at that time. And now for this one with his, for Love. Again, it was the flowy fabrics, and this one in particular was pretty helpful. This fabric has kind of like peacock feathers in it. And so it had the flow of the feathers, but it also had hearts. So it worked really well for the Love panel of this portrait. Tie-dye. Now that was a hard one to find the right fabrics for, but I did have some of these, I did have a variety of fabrics that were gifted to me from a student. And you can see here with this strong contrast piece, it had really nice lights and darks in it, so I could cut around some of those shapes and then place them here. You can see where there's, you know, the high contrast there with the red and the yellow. Up here I've got purple and red. So these kind of streaks in that pattern worked really well in my tie-dye version. And then finally, in Save the Whales, I was looking for watery fabrics, and it's not too hard to find flowy watery fabrics out there, but these are three that I particularly liked. So these three fabrics were all used in the hair. These two are the same print, but they're different colorways. So it worked really well for the light and the dark, the highlights and shadows. And they got worked into the face too, I think, but it had the flow to it that I needed for hair. And then this one, the seaweed, came in really handy to add just a little bit of contrast. It had the greens in it, so it added a little warmth to his portrait as a whole by adding a little green and yellow, and that served as a highlight in addition to my light blues on the hair. So there's a little extra insight in the type of fabrics that I look for in my portraits and why. And I'd like to thank you again very much for helping support this blog.